Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one in our series of Financial Wellbeing Podcasts, where three well-meaning chaps sit around and witter on about money, sometimes with great intent, sometimes just wittering on for the sake of wittering on. But we always hope to find some purpose in what we do. My name's David Lloyd. I'm a broadcaster, writer, actor, general man about town. And I'm joined today by the guy that first came up with the notion of the Financial Wellbeing Podcast, Chris Bird.
I thought you would say the person who first came up with the notion of financial well-being.
Well, you kind of were, weren't you? In a way.
No. Lots of people have been talking about money and happiness for a long, long time. I guess if I'm going to claim anything, I'm the guy that's applying what the research is telling us about happiness and applying it to the financial planning process. I might just try and claim that one, but I suspect there'll be a few other people who are going to claim that as well.
And how many books have you written about this interesting topic, Chris?
Well, 2 books. I was just thinking on the dog walk this morning about a possible idea for a third financial wellbeing book, but that's embryonic to say the very least. So the original financial wellbeing book recently revised and updated. And then last year, the 4 cornerstones of financial wellbeing. If anybody's in wondering what the difference is, the first one is designed to help people make their own financial plan, but crucially one that will make them happier, not just wealthier. The second one, the 4 cornerstones, is a much deeper dive into the kind of theory and philosophy and psychology behind the whole idea of financial wellbeing.
And we also know that the reprint of the original book is out there in airports near you. Get yourself to an airport, WH Smith, and it's there proudly for you to buy, ready for your holiday.
That's exciting. Now, that third voice you heard in our triumvirate of trivia was Tom Morris. Tell us a bit about yourself, Tom.
Yeah, Tom Morris, Director and Chartered Financial. You'll know this now, listeners, if you've listened to this enough. A Chartered Financial Planner at Ovation Finance, who kindly support this podcast and have done since its start in 2016. So, yeah, I'm always keen to make sure that our sponsor and supporter is suitably shouted about. So that's me. I've got other things that I'm interested in, but that's all that's really relevant right now.
Yeah, indeed. So thanks very much for those introductions. What are we talking about today, Chris?
So last episode, we heard about the longest living people in the world, areas with the highest number of centenarians, people who live into 100. We're going to follow that theme a little bit because we're going to have an interview, listening to a chat I had with Dr. Tom Mathar. Now, Dr. Tom is heads the Centre for Behavioural Research with Aegon, who have been a massive supporter of the Institute of Financial Wellbeing. I would go as far as to say without Aegon, the IFW wouldn't exist and be doing its amazing work. So, and Dr. Tom has been central to that, and he's a fabulous guy, lovely, lovely bloke, but also exceptionally knowledgeable.
Excellent. I have a feeling you might have mentioned him in passing on the podcast before.
I'm sure I have.
It rings a bell with me.
I can't believe has he been on before? I can't believe it's taken us this long to get him on. He's brilliant. He's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to that then. But before we do that, obviously we need this episode's TightAssTommo tip, where Tom Morris gives the eager listeners advice on how they can save money. Before we move on to the guru himself, I've got one of my own. It's fairly specific, this one. Okay.
Is it just buy tickets for Bristol City?
No, I never buy tickets for Bristol City. I save myself a fortune. There's a whole story that goes with that, which I can't repeat on air. Ask me another time. So this is a very specific tip. Okay, I've recently come back from an extremely enjoyable holiday in Norway. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Norway, but it's a really beautiful country. Vast country with only 4.5 million people living in it. Because of their sensible investment of their North Sea oil money in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, it's a very prosperous society where people pay high taxes, however, get very well looked after by the state. The one problem that they have in Norway over the years that's manifested itself, and I suspect it's one we're building up for here, is a problem of alcohol abuse. And they had a serious problem with alcohol in Norway. And so the government decided some years ago to step in, and they basically nationalised the retail of strong alcohol. So you can buy beers up to 4.5% in the supermarket. But beyond that, if you want to buy a bottle of spirits or a bottle of wine or whatever, you have to go to what they call a vinmonopolet. Vinmopolet,
Very good.
which is basically a state-run off-license, which is the only place you can go, and that in itself limits the amount of drinking, because people, and they stop selling at 6 o'clock and they don't start selling until 1 o'clock, and they're closed on Sundays, pretty much like it used to be in this country 30 or 40 years ago before alcohol sales were liberalised. It's made a massive beneficial effect on the amount of problem drinking in Norway. It still exists as a problem, but it's gone down as a result of that. However, I'm slightly digressing here to give you the background, because my TightAssTommo tip is, if you're going to Norway on holiday, how do you go about spending the quite exceptionally large amounts of money that they charge you for a bottle of wine in these Vinmopolets, because they also tax them quite highly as well? Well, the answer is, and it's a fairly obvious one, but it's well worth doing, is go to the duty-free shop at the airport when you arrive. Oslo Airport we flew into. Now, you are restricted the amount that you can buy. I think it's 4 bottles of wine and 8 cans of beer or something like that. But actually, if you do that and buy your booze there and take it to your Airbnb, which is what we did, and there were enough adults in the party to be able to, get enough to sort of keep us going for the rest of the week, really, we saved ourselves a fortune on money they otherwise would have spent on subsidising the already very wealthy Norwegian tax fund.
So just to recap, your TightAssTommo tip is go to Norway on holiday and buy wine on the duty free.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Got there in the end, didn't we? Got there in the end.
I remember I gave a tip about batch cooking and using Chinese takeaway and receptors, little trays. And Tommy took the mickey out of me. So you just got to buy Chinese takeaways to be able to do this. I think a TightAssTommo tip that starts off with having to go to Norway is slightly flawed.
And that part of the tip is not about saving money at all. But if you're forced to go to Norway and you think you might want a glass of wine while you're there, buy it in the duty free at Oslo Airport. Yeah,
No,
that's
I like
my case.
That's good. That passes the test for me. That passes the test for me.
What have you got for us?
I'm the arbiter of all of this, so there. So, yeah, I guess you want mine now, David, don't you?
Yes, please.
This was a cracker. This was this week. So my tip is to volunteer to take home the leftover pizzas. So there's a story behind this, and I'll give some context. This week on Monday, we had a big Ovation team sort of meeting day. This is where we talk about how the business is doing, big strategy talk about how we're going to improve it or make it better, what's working, how we're going to meet our objectives, really involve the team in trying to shape that. Anyway, at lunchtime, we ordered some pizzas in. Scoff, I had quite a lot of it, but we over-ordered massively. And you know what? People were getting home in various ways, and I haven't really got the space to take it back, etc. So I said, no, don't worry, I'll take it back, or I'll find a bin for it. So 2 whole pizzas came back with me, and I had a fantastic lunch on Tuesday. I had a fantastic lunch on Wednesday. And I may have had a few bites on Thursday, but by that point, it was really on the edge of whether I should have been eating it or not. But there's my tip. Volunteer to take home the leftover scraps. It was, God, you remember the film Trading Places?
Yeah.
Where he goes in there and he goes in with his Santa's costume and he puts the salmon in his pockets. This has those vibes, doesn't it? Oh.
Well, Tom, I have to say, that's just a step away from rootling through waste bins, isn't it?
It is a little bit. I'm like the Ovation raccoon, going in and snuffling trash cans and all of that sort of stuff like they do in North America. Anyway, there you go. There's my tip.
Excellent. Thank you as ever for your wisdom and your tightness. Right, Chris, back to the main event. Just remind us again who this interview is with.
So, Dr. Thomas Mathar, or Dr. Tom, who is the head of the Centre for Behavioural Research, which is a department within Aegon, who are a massive European pension provider and other types of products, financial services company. And he does research. He talks he mentions, for example, the Institute for Financial Wellbeing, our conference, which at the time I interviewed him was a week or so away. And he's got loads of fascinating things. He and I and somebody also well known to this podcast, Neil Bage. The three of us sometimes get on a Zoom call to just discuss a little point, and then an hour later we're just still going because it's such interesting stuff. So I had a chat with him, particularly about an angle that he's really interested in at the moment, which is the 100-year life and what this means about for our finances. So enough from me. Let's hear from Dr. Tom of Aegon. Dr. Tom, am I allowed to call you Dr. Tom? Is that a suitable sobriquet? Is that right?
That's perfectly fine. That's what I'm used to be calling. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Dr. T, Dr. Tom, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, mate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here. Thank you.
And a little personal thank you from me, because you've done, and Aegon as a whole, but you particularly have done masses to support the whole financial wellbeing cause and the Institute. So personal thank you from me for all that you've been doing over the last few years.
Thank you. And of course, well, we are very much enjoying, working with the Institute and, of course, benefiting from that as well. So it's very much a joint, effort here.
That's how life works, isn't it? Let's be honest. So look, I can't believe we haven't had you on this before. It's absolutely bonkers, because you and I have talked about so many things about years. But you've got a particular thing that you wanted to get out, and it's a really interesting idea about financial well-being in the long term. So, tell me what it is you've got on your mind.
Yeah, sure. So it's a few thoughts on why we are actually talking about financial well-being. I mean, the term is now, of course, established. Many people are talking about it. Many organizations are talking about it for different reasons. I think it is perhaps worth taking a step back and reflecting why we, certainly at Aegon, but perhaps also some other, perhaps planners, financial planners, life planners, however you want to call them, are talking about financial well-being. I think the reason is to do with a very, contemporary problem that we are having, and that is the fact that we are living longer, healthier lives. Yeah, so longevity is, a real, thing. It is something that many more people are experiencing. Not everyone, of course, but as a group, we are experiencing this. There's at the same time things happening like, the withdrawal of the state. You're much more on your own, DB pensions and, welfare in general was more generous a couple of decades ago. And then another thing we have is, of course, the rise of AI, the rise of robotization, the pace at which working environments change is, faster than ever before. So I think these are some sort of backdrops that are happening at the moment, that make life planning and financial planning much more difficult nowadays for people than 20, 30 years ago or so. And that's, I think, why we talk about financial well-being. Sorry, yeah.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's not just more difficult. The stakes are so much higher as well, aren't they? To state something that's so obvious, and yet I think it's so obvious that we could miss it. Our lives are longer, but all of the extra time is non-income producing time. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And the simple fact is that, who lives longer needs more money. That's a really basic, it's a really basic maths problem. You can live on a very modest income, say, I don't know, £20,000 a year. But if you live 20 years longer, then, 20,000 times 20,
that money's going to run out sooner, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really simple problem. And of course, we all know this kind of, right? So we all are aware of the problem, or the opportunity or the challenge. I mean, it's not necessarily, a bad thing. In fact, it's a great thing that we live that long. But of course, it is a challenge. It's a challenge for economies as a whole. It's a challenge for individuals who are needing to fund their longer lives. And I think this is something that will resonate with many people, that making those trade-offs between financial security now versus financial security in the future. What makes me happy now? What makes me happy in the future? Or what do I need to live a happy, fulfilled life in the future, etc.? That is really, really hard trade-offs, really hard ponderings that people have got to make. And I think that is one of the reasons why we are talking about financial well-being, because this is a problem of our time.
Yeah. Now listen, let's come back to those trade-offs, and you can tell us a bit about what they are and what you might do about making good decisions. But there's a little diversion I want to take here, because you were the guy that first mentioned the difficulty of connecting with our future selves. And you were mentioning this phrase, future self, to me for about 18 months before the penny finally dropped with me. And I went and bought Hal Herschel's book, and we had him on the podcast. So that's massive in this space, isn't it? The difficulty with connecting with that future person.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I wouldn't say I'm the first one who's done that work. We have of course done a lot of work, and of course this is where we are developing a tool with academic partners and funded by the UK government. So we are doing a lot in that particular space. But yeah, this is going back to research that we've done at our Center for Behavioral Research that shows that people who have a long-term mental time horizon, they make completely different decisions for themselves. Not only long-term related financial decisions, but also in relation to debt, in relation to having emergency savings, insurance products they possess, etc. So yeah, that's
so just explain that term. Explain that term, long-term mental time horizon. What does that mean?
So a long-term mental time horizon, I mean, of course, define long-term, but you know what I will say, perhaps in our industry, in financial planning and financial advice, and investments in general, we are quite used to be thinking long-term. Yeah. So we are used to be explaining that the reasons for why we should invest is because of how compound interest works, and why it is worthwhile sitting out market volatility, etc. Because in the long term, and I think that is a real challenge. That argument is a real challenge for many people, because they are even struggling to be thinking about what's up in 6 months' time or 12 months' time. But never mind 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Yeah. That's not to say that this is the objective definition of what long term is, but typically that's oftentimes the sort of time horizons that we're thinking of. What I mean, perhaps less financially put, when I speak about long-term mental time horizon, is a strong and meaningful, intrinsically motivated connection to the needs and wants of your future self. Yeah. So of your future me, of yourself in a few years' time.
Yeah. I can remember in my 20s when I first arranged a holiday with my partner, who's now my wife, Susie, and my girlfriend. And we came back from a holiday, and then she said, "Where should we organise for next year?" And I thought, I don't think about next summer. Let's think about that in March. Yeah. Do we all have different time horizons then?
Yeah, I think it comes naturally to different people. To to some people, it probably comes more naturally. I would include myself. It comes more naturally to be thinking long term. For others, it comes more naturally to think short term. For others, it comes more naturally to think about past events than about anything future related. So there is a bit of variation. I mean, I guess you mentioned Hal Herschfeld. The thing that he has shown is that when he slotted these study participants under the fMRI scanner, that most people, when they think about their future self, a version of themselves in the future, they activate a part of the brain that thinks of strangers. So I think this is, neuroscientifically speaking, perhaps it is more common to be a short-term thinker rather than a long-term thinker.
So we all struggle. We all struggle to connect with our future self, some worse than others. Exactly.
And I would say that, and this is why it is so hard, it's just thinking about the needs of your future self isn't the solution either, because the fact is, of course, we're not just living in the future, we're also living today. So again,
that brings us back to the trade-offs that you were talking about.
Exactly.
So describe what you mean by a trade-off.
So a trade-off could be, things like, do I accept a higher paying job at expense for less work-life balance, for less life in that work-life balance, because it pays more, so it may be paying more, I may benefit from it long-term, so it's a classic sort of delayed gratification argument at expense of the present day. That's a trade-off. Another trade-off could be, I don't know, am I working full-time and send the children to nursery, even though much of the salary I earn goes to paying the fees for the nursery. Yeah, that's another trade-off. Another trade-off. Do I forego a salary? Do I quit my job to re-educate and learn a new profession so as to be able to earn an income in another industry for the next 5, 10, 15 years or so? So again, that's another trade-off. I think this is just a few examples of trade-offs that we've got to make all the time. And at the heart of those trade-offs is what makes me happy now, what makes me happy in the future, what gives me financial security now versus what gives me financial security in the future.
Yeah, we'll come back to that phrase, financial security. But I'm just thinking, you put me in mind of one of our very first guests we had on the podcast was a force of nature, a lady called Maria Medeva, who's a professor, but she had written a book about debt because her husband had, unbeknownst to her, racked up about £100,000 in credit card debt.
Ooh.
And exactly. I didn't want to be in that house when she found that out. But she paid that off over something like a year or 2 years. It was absolutely incredible. Her story was so amazing. But one of the things that always struck me was the smallest amount that she used to pay off the debt was something like £2.50.
Wow.
Now that's a trade-off. So a trade-off can be as small as just deciding not to have, I don't want to use the cliche of the cup of coffee, but it could be buying a cup of coffee or buying a sandwich or making one at home rather than buying one at work.
Yes.
These are trade-offs as well. It does go down to that small, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We make those trade-offs all the time. Whenever we are, in every month that we are earning and spending money, we're making those trade-offs.
Yeah. So the financial security or financial independence or whatever phrase we want to use, I know that you've been asked a lot and you've been talking a lot about the difference between financial independence and financial well-being. So take us in that direction. Yeah.
So, this really came about because on the back of the book that I published on financial well-being, just in the German market, but there was...
Don't say just in the German market.
Well, we have that conversation in English here, so I'm saying unfortunately it's not available for the English speaking world. But on the back of that publication, there were a few broadcasters, newspapers, etc., that were asking me about that particular term. Is financial well-being not exactly the same as financial independence? Is it not just another word for the same thing? And I wasn't actually prepared for that particular question. I hadn't looked that much into financial independence. I hadn't spent much time on distinguishing financial well-being between financial independence. But I think there are some crucial differences just from when you look at quick word search on Amazon, for example, on the type of book titles that come up. And there's tons, really. There's so many book titles on that particular subject of financial independence. What I think difference is financial independence is often more like a goal of where you earn where you have enough wealth, where you earn enough income to pay off living expenses, right, for the rest of your life and without having to depend on anything or anyone else. Okay, so that is the goal. When I would say financial well-being is perhaps less of a goal, it's perhaps more like an ambition, like a permanent ambition to earn, spend, and manage money in line with what makes you happy. It is perhaps a more holistic approach that considers habits, that considers mindset, that considers attitudes, that considers beliefs, that considers all sorts of things of behavioral and psychological world. When financial independence is much more focused on wealth accumulation, so as to live a good. There's the sort of naive assumption that all problems are sorted if only I was financially independent. Yeah, this is perhaps a bit crudely put, but you get it.
Yeah, totally. I'd absolutely love that. I would put one extra framing, if I may, which is that financial independence is an outcome. Financial well-being is an area of study. It's not.
Yes.
Some people interpret financial well-being as being that means I'm happy with my money. Well, happiness and money are linked, but it's a whole. It's like a science. It's an art. It's a study of an area of the relationship between money and happiness. And whereas financial security is an outcome of managing your money well, or what?
Yes.
That's my...
Yeah, exactly. Financial security, by the way, I think I have a much more everyday or common man sort of understanding of, which is just, you're not you're not in financial trouble. Let's put it that way. So when financial independence, and this isn't actually in any way a sort of like evidence-based, approach or derived in any sort of academic way. It's really more like, how is that term financial independence being phrased or positioned when you look at, bookshops or wherever you come across the phrase. I think what I would say perhaps is the thing that those who advocate financial well-being would say is that financial independence oftentimes comes at non-financial or psychological opportunity costs that are often overseen, right? Be that broken nights, be that fractious family relationships, be that, all those things, because of your one-sided focus on financial independence, when financial well-being would look at it more holistically.
Yeah, I can give one live example, or one real example, of a guy I was advising once when I was a financial planner years ago, who had achieved financial independence and described himself as bereft, because nobody, I was very new to him being his financial planner, but his previous wealth manager and accountant had never asked him, what's the money for? And so he finally got to having enough money to do anything he wanted, and had never spent any time thinking about what he wanted to do. And now he was stuck. So that would be a live example of the difference between the two. So So we've established the problem that we're all living way longer, and it's all unearning times. We've got to make trade-offs now. We're not built for it. We've got to understand what financial independence really means. But let's now finish off by saying, well, how can we help people? Now, I've got one obvious answer, which is use a financial planner who uses cash flow forecasting, right? Cash flow forecasting is a way of creating a picture to the future.
Yes,
so that's one thing to do. But Aegon's got loads of stuff that you help advisors and planners with about financial well-being. So what sort of tools have you got that people can use?
Sure. So we have tools, we have content, and we have, of course, thoughts. A lot of, the stuff that we do clusters around that notion of the well-being maximizer. So we contrast the well-being maximizer with the performance maximizer. And that goes back to
the advice firm, actually. The advice firm.
Again, sorry?
The advice.
Yeah, exactly. At advice firms, exactly. Financial planners, financial advisors who transition from performance maximization to well-being maximization. And performance maximization, that's your classic alpha. It's all about performance of the policy portfolio versus the benchmark portfolio. It's about asset allocations, it's about costs. It's about, that sort of stuff. And well-being maximization, a well-being maximizer is a type of advisor, a type of planner who has the same functional and technical skill set as a performance maximizer, but who has also a much more human-centric lens. So someone who understands that really the reason to seek financial advice or financial planner is because there are deeper well-being or emotional goals or motives underlying them. And that well-being maximizer would be the type of advisor who would be seeking to understand that, right? And who has different conversations. What type of conversations? That's the sort of stuff that we are talking a lot about. So, questions you can ask when meeting a client first time, when meeting a prospect, questions to ask alongside giving recommendations, questions to ask in a client review meeting, etc. So as to permanently get to know the client better and make sure that their financial plan aligns with deeper intrinsic motivations. That's quite a banal, or not banal, but not a sort of technically advanced way of how we support financial advisors. The other, and this will be a bit more technically advanced, is the Future Self tool that I already mentioned, which is all about helping people get that connection, create that connection to their future self, instill future-oriented mindset and long-term thinking by thinking systematically about what way may some dimensions of my future self be. So this isn't about the money. This is more about who will I be spending time with, where will I live, what will I be doing day in and day out, etc. Those types of intrinsically motivated things, which of course we know are much more likely to create that vivid connection to your future self, much more than money planning would.
Brilliant. So if either there's a financial planner listening who wants to get hold of that, or there's a client who wants their financial planner to get hold of that, what do they do? Speak to their business development manager, Aegon, I presume, do they?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So we have a partnership team at Aegon. A good way to start would be to go on our website, perhaps the advisor-facing side of our website, and look into the financial well-being page. There's lots of good content, many webinars, templates, recorded interviews we have there, etc.
Brilliant. Dr. D, that's absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was a joy. Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Well, what a clever chap Dr. Tom is. That was really interesting. I like the way you referred to this at the start of the podcast, Chris, about how that refers back to what we were discussing in the last podcast about the blue zones where people live longer. And I guess as somebody who is, make no secret about it, next year I'll be 70. And so I'm now at the point where I'm actively starting to think more about my retirement than I am about the work that I do. And that also makes me think about, how long have I got? How much money have I got? And Tom and I have had many conversations about this. He's my financial advisor. How do I make that money last long enough? When can I start spending it? All of those things. And I like the way in which he presents that argument, which is, the problem of longevity. And it is a problem that our parents' generation didn't necessarily have to deal with. And as he said very aptly, who lives longer needs more money, and we all want to live longer, but we still have a finite amount of money in which we have to fund our lifestyle, I guess.
Yeah, I saw a survey recently asking people in their, I think about 60 years old, of what are the things that worry them most, and something like a third of them said how they're going to be able to pay for care home fees. We don't look after our old people very well in this country, if I'm absolutely honest. And we're kind of on our own. And it needs to be one of the big changes over the next 10, 15, 20 years. But we are on our own by and large. And this is a very new problem for humanity. We're just not built to be thinking this way. So, yeah, it's a really interesting area that he talks about.
And again, linking it back to the Blue Zones podcast, the last one.
Yeah.
One of the benchmarks of people that live longer was having their parents around, their aging parents around, and keeping them close and looking after them. And something I've thought about a lot recently, this notion of, we tend to shunt our old people into care homes now when they become a little bit too difficult to look after. And therefore, we then have an expectation, I think, and a dread that might, certainly it's something that I absolutely am terrified of. I don't want to end up gibbering in a care home. I'd rather somebody gave me a firm tap on the head and said goodbye. And so without getting too morbid about it,
we have that recorded, David. By the way,
it's all right. My son comes round with a hammer every time he comes to visit.
do you mind if I chime in here? I've got a few points so I'd love to make about that interview, but also your points about how we shunt the elderly off into care homes and relating it to the blue zones. Don't forget the blue zones, we're all living healthy older ages. So there's a combination here that you need a healthier older generation for those younger generations to be able to look after them. Because a lot of the time people are put in care because the younger generation don't have the capability. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think there's various parts to that. So I'm not going to chastise people who are putting their older relatives into care for that reason. But look, in terms of what Dr. Tom was saying, a couple of things jumped out at me. Firstly was this talk about financial independence versus financial well-being. I love the point that he made that financial independence is such an outcome-focused strategy, whereas financial well-being almost feels like the journey itself. Because you see a lot about financial independence in that movement. That's great, but you're kind of missing the point of the life that's going on in the meantime and the life that you're going to have afterwards. So yeah, that jumped out at me. But also for the financial planners, advisors, whatever you want to call yourself, listening to that, are you a performance maximizer? Are you focused on the advice part, the products, the investments, the tax, the planning, all very important to get right? And I certainly see myself as a performance maximizer, but also a well-being maximizer. Add that extra layer and have those human-centric conversations that Tom was talking about. And all of a sudden, you're linking what you're trying to do on the performance side to what somebody's actually trying to achieve from their life. And it can be very powerful and and selfishly, a far more enjoyable way to make a living.
And I've actually, Dr. Tom did some research on this about 2 years ago, and the statistics are really interesting about how much better for your business it is to be a well-being maximizer. The client referrals, the longevity of clients, this kind of stuff, as well as being, and that's the key bit, Tom, isn't it? It's a much more fun way of doing the job.
It is. And also, let's not forget why, and trust me, listener, who aren't in financial services, the main reason why people are still financial advisors and planners is because they really care about the outcomes of the people they serve and look after. And the wellbeing maximizer, absolutely in my belief, will deliver better outcomes for the people that they look after. And that can only be a good thing.
Well, on that very positive and very, very true note, I think we should wind things up. So thanks, guys, for your contributions and your thoughts as ever. Thanks to Dr. Tom for a fascinating chat with Chris. And thanks to you, listeners, for listening. And I hope you'll join us again at some indeterminate point in the future for another one of our Financial Wellbeing podcasts.
If you want to be notified of upcoming podcasts, make sure you click the subscribe button. For more information on the topics discussed in today's podcast and to purchase a copy of the Financial Wellbeing book, please visit www.financialwell-being.co.uk. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on financial well-being. You can send us an email at contact@financialwell-being.co.uk. You can follow us on Twitter @FinWellbeing. Chris is Ovation Chris, and David is @Dave_Backwell. This has been an Ovation Finance production. Thanks for listening to the Financial Wellbeing Podcast. More interesting than you might think.